Apparently, I'm not the only one who has an issue with a rapidly discharging battery in a Soyo 4SAW2 socket 3 motherboard. In today's video, I will share with you how I fixed the issue on my board, which I totally discovered by accident. Additionally, we are looking at another Intel 486 DX2-66 that features write-back support for its level 1 cache. We are still at the beginning of a journey to find components that will make it an enjoyable experience to run Tomb Raider from 1996 on the Socket 3 platform. I wonder if this game will benefit from the improved write-back cache of this CPU. Unfortunately, we have to rely on our perception of whether the game runs any better, because we still do not have a frame counter available in the software renderer. We have already seen the write-through 486 DX2 model in a previous video. The CPU we look at today was released in 1994. But of course, this CPU has the same issue as the Intel Pentium Overdrive and the write-through model. This is the third CPU of the handful of CPUs I picked up at the scrapyard. And it could be the third one we bring back to life. What is interesting about this 486 DX2-66 is the debossed i66 logo you can see at the bottom of the CPU. Something that you may also see on early Pentium models. Some speculate that this was done by Intel to prevent selling fake or mislabeled chips. Furthermore, this CPU is also available with a gold cap over the silicon die, but I happen to have the one with a black metal cap. By now, you have seen me straightening a lot of pins, and the outcome was always above expectations. At least for me, and probably also for some of you. So there is very little to worry about, considering that the other two CPUs turned out really well. Oh no! The pin in the corner broke off. I guess it had to happen at some point. At closer inspection, we can see that the pin suffers from corrosion. It looks like the pin cracked where it was bent and started to rust. Well, this is new, and something we will have to take care of after the remaining pins are straight. While I continue with the rest of the CPU pins, let me tell you about today's video sponsor, PCBWay. Whether you're a passionate hobbyist or a business owner seeking reliable PCB manufacturing, PCBWay stands out for its user-friendly platform, offering an effortless process from order to delivery. Experience unmatched quality as each PCB undergoes rigorous testing to ensure precision and functionality, meeting the highest industry standards. With competitive prices, exceptional quality, and excellent customer service, PCBWay has earned the trust of countless satisfied customers worldwide. Now it's time to turn your ideas into reality. Links to PCBWay.com are in the video description. Meanwhile, I fixed the rest of the pins of this CPU. Let's quickly check which pin broke off. Maybe it is just a power or a ground pin, which most of the time are redundant and the CPU may continue to work without. The pin in question is located right in the corner, on a 486 CPU, better known as pin A1. And from this diagram we can see that it is D20, which is a data line and absolutely vital. So we are out of luck. This pin must go back on this CPU for it to work. But I don't want to use the original pin because this one started to rust. Instead, I decided to borrow a pin from a non-functioning AMD CPU. The ceramic of this CPU chipped and took one pin with it. Unfortunately, I'm not able to repair something like this, but I must admit, it is not that I haven't tried. Now, this CPU will serve as a donor for a new pin. I don't know if you have seen my Pentium 3 pin replacement video, but in that video, I could easily remove pins by using a hot air station. But this technique does not work on 486 CPUs. I have tried, but the pins do not budge. So I had to turn to a more crude method to harvest the pin, which, for the sake of not violating YouTube's violence and graphical content guidelines and your sanity, I won't show in this video. Before we reattach the pin, I remove any corrosion with an engraving pen, and then I apply solder to the empty pad. I am in luck that the pins on 486 CPUs are arranged with quite a bit of distance between them. Furthermore, the pin I need to solder on is in the corner of the outer row. I think there couldn't be a better place than this. It still requires some good control to place the pin in the right spot, but it is definitely possible. I just need to make sure to not cover the entire pin in solder. And after cleaning off the remaining flux, the CPU is ready to be tested. Of course, the drop-in socket test should not be missed for our Intel i66, a 486 DX2-66 with write-back level 1 cache. And another perfect score. But before we can power on the system, we have to change some jumpers for this CPU. Yes, even though it is a DX2-66 like the previous CPU we have tested, for the write-back cache to work, we have to reconfigure the board. If you miss this step, the CPU will be detected as an 8486 DX2S, and as you may expect, the level 1 cache is going to be operating in write-through mode. With the correct jumper settings, the board detects the CPU as the P24DS, and the cache check tool reports our level 1 cache to be operating in write-back mode. Here is a list of CPUs and their respective code names. I collected this information from several sources, so it could be that it is not entirely correct or comprehensive. I don't know if you've noticed, but we are at 3 working CPUs from 5 I've picked up at the scrapyard. But now it is finally time that we take care of the rapidly discharging battery of my Soyo SY4SAW2 motherboard. I know some of you are eager to find out what was the issue on my board. To better show you how I found out, I have to return this component I removed during my last video. It is a surface-mounted capacitor. But let's start from the top. I noticed that the button cell battery in my Soyo board depleted within a couple of days after I finished the Pentium Overdrive video. And even during my last project, the battery depleted rapidly. Here you can see me measuring an already weak 2.89 volt button cell battery. 1 day later, the voltage is down to 2.725 volts. It didn't take much longer until I lost the settings saved in the BIOS. When I started the system, the board informed me that the BIOS checksum was incorrect, the CMOS battery failed, and that the default values had been loaded. And even though the time and date were still correct, my BIOS settings were gone. No matter how often I reapplied the BIOS settings and saved, the moment I exited the BIOS, the values were gone. I considered removing the battery each time I was done using the board. But what if this board goes into a permanent retro build? This would be a very inconvenient drawback and a waste of batteries if this board was kept in this state. Despite my limited knowledge of electronics, I started to probe around the battery charging circuit that we have modified in the last video. With a multimeter in volt mode and the board powered off, I tried to find the components connected to the battery. Here, for instance, we can observe a voltage drop caused by a Schottky diode we have put in place of the original silicon diode. After this diode, the trace connects to a second diode, but the current won't be able to flow through it. There is, however, a trace that continues from the diode solder pad to resistor R4. Our multimeter still tells us that the difference in voltage is about 0.2 volts, which is the voltage drop of one of the diodes. But when I measure the other terminal of the resistor, the value changes to 1.6 volts. So we have a rather large voltage drop of 1.4 volts across this resistor. That may be normal, and if you're familiar with voltage dividers using resistors, then you probably would say, so that is what is happening in a circuit? Fair enough, but to me, something didn't feel right, so I kept digging. There is one trace going from the resistor to the right, which eventually disappears in a via. No other component is connected to this trace along the way. To the left, the pad connects to this capacitor labeled C8. And the voltage drop across this component is the remaining 1.26 volts. Since one side of the capacitor is connected to ground, there is nothing else we can check. So let's focus on those two components, the capacitor and the resistor. Now I have put the multimeter in resistance mode, so I can measure the value of this resistor. And as expected, the value is 1 kilo ohm, matching the number 102 printed on the resistor's housing. However, when I move towards the capacitor, I get a reading of about 6.8 kilo ohms. That value is a lot lower compared to the other capacitors in this area, which return a resistance value in the mega ohms. It was a wild guess, but I had a suspicion that this capacitor may be the culprit. After I removed it from the circuit, I tried to get a capacitance reading with my multimeter. And wouldn't you know, the multimeter is not able to get a proper reading from this component. Testing the resistance outside the circuit reveals again a value in the single-digit kilo ohms, even lower than we have measured in circuit. Now I'm very certain that this is the faulty component that is responsible for a rapidly discharging battery. The only spare capacitors I had at hand having the correct dimensions measured 100 picofarads. I believe those caps are mainly used for filtering and won't require a large capacitance. If you have more details or can suggest a better capacitance value for the replacement cap, please let me know in the comments, because I cannot figure out what the value of the original capacitor is. With a new capacitor in place, the voltage drop across the resistor R4 is now 0. Before, we observed a voltage drop of 1.4 volts. I replaced the battery in the motherboard with a new one, and now we have a voltage reading of 3.22 volts. We do lose a little bit of voltage across the diode, but now the value remains constant on both terminals of the resistor. So, if you have this board or a similar one and suffer from a rapidly discharging battery, check the capacitors below it. They may be the one to blame. To find a potential faulty cap on this board, I'd recommend measuring the resistance across the capacitors. The measured value should be something around 3 megaohms or more. If the reading is in kilo ohms, then I'd recommend taking the component of the board to measure it outside the circuit. The faulty capacitor on my board behaved like a resistor and drained the CMOS battery rather quickly. Luckily, this problem is now gone. So far, the board is working great. The battery keeps its charge, the BIOS settings remain saved, and I'm happy that we can finally move on to the main topic. Tomb Raider on a 486 DX2-66 with write-back cache. Unfortunately, there is not much to tell. The game feels identical to the regular DX2 CPU. At least I couldn't feel any difference in the first level of the game. Maybe the CPU is a bit faster, but still overwhelmed with processing the graphics of the game. I wish I had better news, but Lara will require more help from faster CPUs. In the next video, I want to try one of those 5x86 CPUs from Cyrix. They were supposed to be superior to their 486 counterparts, and it will be a CPU that is clocked at 100 MHz. I want to finish this video by looking at some benchmark results. Maybe there we will be able to see a difference between those CPUs, since we can't notice any difference in Tomb Raider. System information shows an identical CPU score for both DX2-66 CPUs. However, I want to bring your attention to a difference I noticed when disabling the turbo feature. D-turbo, so to say. The write-back model reduces its speed by half and achieves 71.8 points instead of the 143.4 points at full speed. The write-through model, on the other hand, only slows down to 99.8 points, which is quite a bit faster compared to the write-back model. When the turbo button is engaged, both CPUs reach a score of 143.4 points. Topbench showcases another difference between those two CPUs. The turbo mode for the write-back model does not affect performance at all. While the write-through model slows down to about 135 points, the write-back model remains at 182 points, which is also slightly faster compared to the 178 points of the write-through version. Doom is a bit of a mixed bag. When the turbo mode is inactive, the write-back model achieves almost 21 frames per second, while the write-through model tops out at 18.25 frames per second. With an active turbo setting, the write-through model performs better compared to the write-back model with frame rates of 25.6 versus 24.2 frames per second respectively. In the PC Player benchmark, the write-back CPU can slow down a lot more compared to its write-through counterpart. At 5.7 frames per second, the write-back model is 3 frames slower compared to the 8.6 frames per second of the write-through model. With turbo enabled, both CPUs reach 11 frames per second. And 3D Bench is the last test I have for you. Once more, the write-back model can slow down more compared to the write-through model. At 27.9 frames, the write-back model is 4.5 frames slower compared to the write-through model at 32.4 frames per second. Once we enable the turbo setting, both CPUs score around 43 frames per second. So, is there a big difference between those CPUs? I would say no. Although write-back is a superior cache strategy, it does not seem to significantly help the CPU to get higher scores. It is more like the contrary is true. The write-back CPU seems to have issues in games like Doom, where the write-through model, released over 2 years earlier, scored better. I wonder if this will translate to Tomb Raider when we get it running using real 3D accelerators. But until then, you have to be a bit more patient. In the next video, we will cover Cyrix and their 5x86 CPUs for socket 3 clocked at 100 MHz. If you don't want to miss that and haven't subscribed to my channel yet, then now would be the perfect time to do so. And if you enjoyed today's video, then you would really help me out if you press the like button. Let me know in the comments if you have a socket 3 board that suffers from a quickly discharging battery, and if the fix I showed in today's video may be applicable to your motherboard. And that is all I have for you today. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.